How did you get into this? What kickstarted like the whole fitness thing for you? Because everybody has that that period of time in their life, when they were like, you know what, I love this. This is what I want to do. I want to focus my life on this.
I got picked on a lot and bullied when I was young, really badly. And so I picked up lifting weights to try to stop getting bullied and get attention from girls. And it didn't really fix either of those two things, but I fell in love with lifting weights. I picked it up when I was like 15, and then I kind of quit when I got my first girlfriend, shocker. And then at 17, I picked it back up, and I never stopped. And so as I was finishing high school, I played baseball through high school, and I kind of knew I wasn't really going to go. Like, I was a good player, but I'm a 5'10" right-handed average hitting first baseman. Those aren't really in high demand. So I could have walked on to a team in college, but it's like, for what end? You know what I mean? And so I was going to go. Originally, my first passion was sharks. I love sharks. I love marine biology. I still love going out in the water and on the ocean. And I love fishing. And I was going to go to Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, because they had a great marine science program. But then I talked to a few actual marine scientists, and they're like, hey, like, go general first. And then if you want to specialize, do that in graduate school. Because if you specialize too early and this ends up not being a thing, you can't really use that degree anywhere else. And also, it doesn't really pay well. So I'm like, okay. So I decided I would do biochemistry as a freshman in college. But I was already kind of getting into bodybuilding as baseball was ending. I was like, I found out there was like teen bodybuilding competitions. I'm like, I could do this thing, right, to focus me and give me something to work towards. And my roommate freshman year actually was into bodybuilding too. So it was like the perfect setup for like getting really into the sport. And I signed up for my first bodybuilding show the summer after my freshman year. I won that, the teen division and the novice division. And that was like, fell in love, And so I, 3 years into doing biochemistry, I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I know I want to do it in the fitness industry. But at the time, the ways to make money were basically like open a gym, be a PT, start a supplement company, try to be Mr. Olympia. And I'm like, those didn't feel like things that I didn't come from money. I didn't really have like capital to put down. I didn't like the idea of a bunch of debt. So I was like, well, you know what? I'll go to like grads. Like literally the reason I went and did a PhD was because I was like, well, I can delay the real world by 4 to 8 years. And hopefully by then I'll have that shit figured out, So as I went into graduate school, I was writing for bodybuilding.com. I started writing for them and then some other websites and then some other magazines. And I was posting on their forums. Like I probably made 100,000 posts over 10 years on these different internet message boards. And just had people emailing me, asking me questions, wanting me to write them diets. So I took my first online client in 2005, started doing that. That within 3 years turned into a full-time business, and I was off. And then all the other things that kind of sprouted out of that. And I was early adopter of social media. So it was kind of this weird synergy as social media was coming up. I was doing my PhD. I was doing, real research in protein metabolism and nutrition. I was also coaching people. So I was applying it. I was competing myself. So I was applying it to myself. And I really think that synergism of things really gave me a unique perspective on this stuff. And quite frankly, I think it made, athletes, people who do this stuff, they don't just want to talk to some egghead who has never tried to apply it to themselves or anybody else, right? Like when I was on Rogan's podcast 2018, the thing he said was like, you actually train hard. Like you walk the walk, like you do it, you apply this stuff, And so before me, not totally, there were some people who were like into bodybuilding who did PhDs before me, but I was kind of like the first visible person who did it. It was kind of thought, well, you're either going to go, do research and be an egghead, or you're going to be, lifting hard and not really caring about research and doing bro stuff. And so I saw that as like, maybe I could be the bridge. You know what I mean? Maybe I could show people that like, hey, hardcore and evidence-based are not mutually exclusive, And so that's kind of how I got into it. And I had a great PhD advisor who I'm actually going to go see this weekend because he's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society for Nutrition. And honestly, this is what I try to teach now. His name's Don Layman. A couple things. The first thing was he taught me how to think, which I think is so difficult. it is easy to fall into black and white. It's easy to be cognitively dissonant. What's really hard is to continuously question what you believe to be true. And he challenged me so much on so many things. I just got okay with being wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I care more about the right answer than I do about being right. Like, I like being right. Don't get me wrong. I'll do like somersaults in my living room if I'm right. But I care more about getting the right answer, right? Because I'm a competitor. I want to do the best thing. Like, that's what I tell people. I'm like, don't you think that if this thing you're talking about was really that great or really that bad, that I would change the way I do things? Like, I would, you know?
Yeah, I think ego gets in the way of a lot of strength coaches in general. I've seen it, you know, they're ego driven.
Well, and also people make a way of training or a way of eating an identity.
Yeah.
That's also what happens, right? So if you've got, for example, carnivore Katie in your profile, if you come to the realization that maybe carnivore is not the best thing ever, it's pretty hard to walk that back.
Right.
You know, that's why you don't see flexible dieting in my profile. You don't see macro counting. You don't see high volume trade. You don't see any of that stuff because I don't want to tie my horse that strong to anything because I could be wrong. You know, I don't think I'm wrong on that stuff, but I could be. And so he taught me that. And he also, I remember when I was giving my PhD exits, or actually a great story here. I'll tell it real quick. My first experiment I ever did, I got the data back and I'm like, this can't be right. We were looking at the duration of muscle protein synthesis in response to a meal. And I just thought however long the amino acids stayed up in the blood would be how long protein synthesis went. And it did. Protein synthesis ran for like 3 hours, was done, while amino acids were still elevated in the blood. And I reran the plasma amino acids probably like 6 times. And finally, Layman brings me in his office and he's like, where do we stand with this duration study? I'm like, yeah, I just got to run the plasma stuff one more time because it can't be right. And he's like, go on, explain this to me. Why do you think it's not right? And I'm like showing him the data. He's like, your standard errors look good. Your technique for measuring this on the HPLC is good. It sounds like, I'll never forget this line. It sounds like you're trying to change the data to fit your conclusion. And what you need to do is change your conclusion to fit the data. And I was like, oh shit. I'm like, that is textbook cognitive dissonance right there. I was so attached to what I believed to be true that I was just straight looking past the data, right?
Yeah.
And so then like that experiment actually kind of changed the way I ate a little bit. And like, I'm like that to me, when I was wrong in the stuff I measured or my hypothesis, that actually ended up being the coolest shit that came out of my PhD, right? So like, I just made me okay with being wrong. And then I was giving my exit seminar. One other thing he said that stuck with me, I said, okay, my mom's going to be at my exit seminar and professors are going to be at my exit seminar. Who do I write this for? And he goes, I should learn something and your mom should learn something. And I was like, oh man, because that's hard to write for, right? Because, you know, the general population wants you to generalize, but if you generalize too much, you lose a lot of the nuance. So I just got really good at being able to like relay complex stuff in kind of a relatable way. And he was a big part of that. But I think it's, you know, teaching, I try to teach people how to think. I try to make them think about stuff. And one of the things I tell people, it's hard to navigate the landscape of social media because it's a fire hose of information, right? Like you're just getting blasted with information all the time. And listen, compared to 20 years ago, all we had was the bro science magazines. So I think it is better now because you can actually find good evidence-based people who have some pretty good followings, but you're going to have to sift through a lot of crap, right?
Yep.
I tell people, listen to the way people talk, not so much what they say, but the way they talk. Big red flags are when somebody uses words best, worst, always, never, right? Like as an NFL football player, if I said, okay, you want to get past that offensive lineman, here's the best move for everybody. It's like, no, you know, some guys bull rushed, right? Freeney had the spin move. Like it just depends on the individual, right? Like, and it depends on the context, who you're going against, what kind of offense, what kind of, you know, scheme do they have, right? Like it depends on everything, right? I always relate it also to like, look at when the Patriots were at their best, right? They would run the ball 70 times in a game, and then the next game they'd throw it 60 times. They did not care.
They schemed up the best possible plan to win the game.
And some guys would go, you know what? We run the ball and play defense. It's like, well, that works until somebody figures out your stuff.
Yeah. And everybody's gonna get figured out. It's kind of like a plateau, you know, when you hit like a plateau and you kind of peak out like with training, you know, it's like, well, what I got to change something then. That means I got to do something different.